Thank you for joining us again for this very informative teaching concerning the story of creation and pole shift as taught to the elite from their sacred book of knowledge that they hold as dear to their hearts as some do the Bible. The Light of Egypt, or the Science of the Soul and the Stars. In part 1, we revealed to you the forgotten and mystical cycle of the sun and the moon, the oldest and most complete of all heavenly cycles, Neuronia. We showed you how the 7 days also represent these great heavenly cycles, and that some of them are coming into day 7, or rather completion, and also their effects on our planet as well as its inhabitants. Now, we will help you to understand pole shift and its role in the 7 days of Genesis, and it is our hope that by the end of this reading, you will understand the true purpose for the Georgia Guidestones and the reasoning behind their location, because, contrary to what some may believe, they are not there because the government plans to kill off the population. No, nature will do it for them, as it has done so in the past, and the message is for those few who might survive the coming destruction, to govern themselves until government can be reestablished. Their location just happens to be on the highest peak in the state of Georgia, and if you are aware that a few ages ago, the mid to southern plains of Georgia were either underwater or swampland, well then the Georgia Guidestones begin to make sense to you. So let us begin with the reading of Chapter 5, La Clef Hermétique, the Cycles and Forces of Creative Life. In attempting to explain the sublime system of esoteric cycles as taught in the occult schools of the Egyptian Magi, we shall notice their great cycles first, which relate to human and planetary evolution, then compare, or rather introduce, for the student's comparison, the sacred cycles of Hindu initiates, and show some of their striking relationships to the well-known facts of geological research, and, lastly, attempt to show how these natural periods of action and reaction of the cosmic life forces have formed the truthful foundation upon which the astrological mystics have elaborated their planetary periods and subcycles of celestial influence over nations, and which is further and more fully elaborated by Kabbalistical lore in the rule of the 7 archangels as the 7 governors of the world, which they say, after God, actuate the universe. Nature's Triune Index. Nature has furnished her students with the means of reaching her mysteries in the dual form of intuition and intellect, and of measuring her mighty forces in the forms of time and space. The first index of time is the rotation of the earth upon her axis, the second by her annual motion about the sun. These are broadly converted into days, months, and years. The third index is that of the motion of the Earth's center, the sun, through space around a still greater center. This is broadly divided into 2 measures. First, through one sign of the zodiac, a period of 2,160 years, and secondly, through the entire 12 signs which complete the grand revolution or great solar year in 25,920 years of earthly time. The third and last face of the Triune Index is our Earth's pole. This magnetic point is the great finger of nature's cyclic timepiece, which governs and registers all the great cosmic cycles of our planet and its circuit. Remember the significant fact, then, that the motion of the Earth's pole is the motion of her evolutionary forces, both human and physical. Polar motion. When this beautiful motion of the Earth's pole has become familiar, the student will begin to see the divine harmony of nature's grandest law Which law causes every portion of our Earth's surface to become alternately a fruitful plain or barren waste, dry land or ocean bed? The Earth's poles move in one uniform direction, with a slow, imperceptible motion that forms a spiral path in the heavens, consisting of a number of small spiral orbits or circles, one overlapping the other. These small spiral circles are termed volutes, their true value in space being 3 degrees, 36 minutes, no seconds. The motion of the inclination of the pole is at the rate of 50 seconds of space per century, or 1 second in every 2 years. At this rate, it requires 7,200 years to move over 1 degree, and as there are 360 degrees in a circle, or the pole's orbit, it takes 360 times 7,200 years, equal to 2,592,000 years, to make a complete revolution of its orbit, or 100 solar years. Each volute being 3 degrees, 36 minutes, no seconds, in time value, 25,920 years, are required for the pole to complete one small spiral orbit, and as there are exactly 100 of these spiral orbits in the complete orbit, therefore 100 times 25,920 years equals 2,592,000 years, which period is termed by initiates one polar day. One polar day equals 100 solar years. We will now give a few brief examples of polar motion. If the student will, for a moment, imagine our Earth's pole to be perpendicular to the plane of its orbit, and consequently coinciding with the pole of the ecliptic. Then, the signs of the zodiac and the apparent yearly path of the sun will always be vertical at our Earth's equator. Hence, universal spring will reign in the temperate zones and a gentle, continuous summer in all subtropical latitudes. It will cause the equatorial regions of the Earth to become blazing, scorching deserts. The Great Plains will be unfit for habitation owing to the fierce rays of a vertical sun, continuing for long ages. Only the mountainous portions will be the seat of human life. This condition will cause equal day and night all over the globe, but as we recede from the equator, north or south, the sunlight becomes less and less owing to the sun attaining a lesser degree of altitude with every degree of latitude until, at the poles, the sun will only appear as a dull red ball of fire moving along the horizon from east to west in the 12 hours from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Hence, darkness and universal winter reign supreme. And the Arctic Circle is an everlasting belt of ice and snow whose frozen breath forms a complete barrier against the existence of human life. Again, imagine the Earth's pole after a lapse of 648,000 years, and we shall now find that it is inclined at an angle of exactly 90 degrees, for during this period it has been slowly but imperceptibly to the Earth's inhabitants moving or inclining away from the pole of the ecliptic. The 12 signs of the zodiac and the apparent yearly path of the sun are now vertical to the pole of the Earth. What will be the fearful geological results? Why, that our polar regions will have a tropical summer. Each year the sun will be vertical on the 21st of June to the North Pole and on the 21st of December to the South Pole, and also that every portion of the globe with the sun and the Earth's pole in this position will witness a tropical summer and an Arctic winter. This accounts for and fully explains the existence of fossil remains of the seal, walrus, and polar bear in the burning plains of Africa and Hindustan, and of the tropical remains now being discovered in the Arctic regions. No human being now living can conceive the fearful natural phenomena yearly transpiring during this period. For instance, all latitudes below the poles had two midsummers each year, namely, when the sun ascended north and when it returned south again. The rapid rate at which the sun rose into the polar circles and the terrific heat of a vertical sun upon the ice and snow must have caused the most frightful inundations upon all the plains and lowlands. No wonder that it was called the Age of Horror by the Hindus and Egyptian Magi. The walls of the mighty Babylon and the eight-vaulted Tower of Babel, or cloud-encompassed Baal, were never constructed to resist any mortal foe. No, these city walls, which were 60 miles in circumference, 200 feet high, 578 feet thick, were not made to defy the strength of armies, but to resist the fearful forces of nature, the floods that swept the plains of Shinar from the mountains of Armenia every spring during this age of horror. The tremendous embankments and river walls constructed by the ancients and monuments of human skill and enterprise belonging to an epoch that antedates by thousands of years the age of their supposed builders. These mighty monuments of old are indeed the sacred relics of our early forefathers, but modern historians are so nose-bound by biblical chronology that they cannot yet see the light. Like young puppets, their eyes will not open to the light until they are 9 days old. The student is here requested to notice that all the great solar and lunar observatories were constructed for a twofold purpose. Their religion, unlike that of their degenerated descendants, was a pure scientific theology, or the wisdom religion. Those nations and peoples whom our historians denominate ancient were but degenerated castes, and in comparison with the nations who built the cloud-encompassed Baal, are quite modern. The grand scientific temples of the sun and moon, then, were erected at a period when the sun was vertical to the latitude of the place, and their ages can be easily computed by the following simple formula. Our Earth's equator is the zero or starting point of all computations, and was taken into consideration by the ancient artists, who always built with some significant occult purpose. Each zone was constituted by the great solar cycle of 25,920 years, during which period the poles moved over one volute, which they, in round numbers, reckoned at 4 degrees, and all those buildings will be found when constituted on this plan, to point exactly to the time when they were built. If their latitude corresponds with their symbol, for instance, the Tower of Babel was 8-vaulted, that is, with a spiral staircase winding 8 times round it. This means that it was built when the sun was vertical in the latitude of 32 degrees. 4 times 8 are 32, or, as an initiate of our noble order, 63 years ago, 1822, speaking of the awful Iron Age, says, It may be noted that the very ancient sacred towers in the pagodas of China always, unless they are of modern construction, faithfully indicate their latitude and date of their first foundation by the number of stories or terraces. Of course, it is not supposed that these towers, like our ancient cathedrals, are not periodically restored as they fall into decay, but always on the same principle. A great deal more might be said as to the different climates that ensued under different inclinations of our Earth's pole, but these few illustrations will give the student a few ideas as to the actual cause of the various geological changes that are brought about by polar motion. Remember that the great polar day, 2,592,000 years, moving once around like the index of the clock, determines the duration upon our planet of that vital spiritual impulse of evolution, known among students and initiates as the Great Life Wave. This life wave passes through the serpentary chain or circuit of the 7 planets, not in an even regular continuous action, but in waves or impulses. For instance, suppose the life wave of all mineral evolution commences upon planet number 1. It will here go through its active evolution, and then, having reached its culminating point, it commences to flow or pass on to planet number 2, and the vegetable or next life impulse begins upon planet number 1, and so on with the rest. Upon this point, we would refer the student to Mr. Sennett's valuable book, Esoteric Buddhism, but reminding you that, although there are many outlines in the book similar to these teachings, they are in reality widely different, as will be seen when you read his conclusions and those of this revelation. In order to better illustrate the evolution of matter and the evolution of spirit, we will briefly describe and outline the systematic and harmonious process followed by nature in the complete evolution of a planet, similar in the construction to our Earth. In the first place, it must be borne in mind that there are 7 kingdoms, 7 principles, and 7 ruling powers in nature, a trinity of 7, and also that matter, so called, is but the most remote expression of spirit. The further a state is removed from its source, the more dense it becomes, until spirit can express itself in metallic form and become materialized as veins and loads of mineral, or in the body of a planet, and tower itself upon that planet's surface in granite mountains, limestone hills, or chalky dells, and that the boundless space is filled with a fine invisible form of condensed spirit, known to scientists as cosmic dust. And lastly, that nature's operations are performed in an endless series of waves, which, in their motion, form graceful curves, the rise and fall of the arc of the curve forming its cycle of duration. The 7 kingdoms are the 3 elemental and visible, and the 4 objective and visible planes of nature, while the order of the 7 principles or forms of evolution is as follows: 1. The spiritual. 2. The astral. 3. The gaseous. 4. The mineral. 5. The vegetable. 6. The animal. 7. The human. See Chapter 2 of Section 1. The 7 governors or powers ruling a planet are the 7 angelic states, mentioned more fully in La Clef Chapter 6. Having explained the rudiments, it will better express our meaning to use a biblical illustration. So we will now esoterically explain the 6 days of creation, mentioned in Genesis, each day being 1 polar day, as before stated, or 2,592,000 years of earthly time. The words, the evening and the morning, signify the 2 halves of the polar cycle. You will notice that the evening is mentioned first and the morning last. This is correct. The dark or undeveloped portion of each wave is the first half and signifies symbolically night, and vice versa. Further, it must be remembered that the spiritual impulse or wave must of necessity pass round the orbit that has ultimately to be traversed by the future planet before anything can transpire. It is the divine will sent forth by the spirit state that is equivalent to the word or divine idea of certain ancient writers. This fiat attracts within its orbit the latent cosmic matter of space and transforms it into the embryonic nebulous light, the stardust or radiant fire mist, which is the form or primitive matter of all creation. The student must strictly remember that there is no specific duration of this state. It may last for millions of ages before the actual evolution of a planet, and that previous to the symbolical 6 days of creation, this planet exists for untold cycles in a nebulous condition, the exact size of its orbital ring. This being understood, we will describe the first day of creation. The supreme angelic governors project into active evolution the astral tidal wave, the currents of astral light, and the nebulous matter is at once transformed into a rapidly evolving globe of fire, which solidifies and cools under the intense concentration of the deific will of the governors in a wonderfully less space of time than any of our transcendental or spiritual writers can imagine. Fire was dominant for the first half of the polar day, when its surface had become so far cooled as to allow the heated vapors of its immense atmosphere to condense and form water, which element was rapidly produced during the next half of the cycle. Thus we see that a rude globe was formed during the first day of creation. The first half, the evening, was given to the dominion of fire alone, and the latter half, or morning, was one ceaseless war between those opposing elements, fire and water. And the evening and the morning were the first day. These 2 periods of the polar cycle are each 1,296,000 years, and were called by the Hindus the Tetrayuga. The second day of creation, the supreme angelic governors now caused the first evolution of the gaseous or chemical tidal wave, and the evolution of a complete but dense atmosphere was the result. That is to say, the various constituents of the atmosphere were, by this wave, adjusted, and our planet's chemical affinities duly balanced. This caused the whole of the superabundant gross matter, such as carbon, etc., to condense and fall to the surface of the planet. During this day also, our planet's surface was the scene of a continual conflict between heat and water. All was the scene of mighty volcanic action. Mountain ranges continually rose and fell, and the ocean beds were always shifting. The third day of creation, after the gaseous, the great mineral tidal wave commenced, and the spirit atoms of future egos became incarnated in dense matter for the first time, namely, in the stratus of rocks and mineral lobes, which constitute the stony ribs and metallic veins of our planet. Mountains, valleys, islands, and continents were formed. The land above the ocean level sank, and the bed of the oceans became dry land. Now, for the first time, the seas and oceans occupied their proper beds, and the evening and the morning were the third day. It must be added that during this period also, the planet's surface was the scene of continual volcanic action, and was each and every period. At the close of this, the third polar cycle, we see that the evolution of the astrochemical and mineral waves have now prepared our Earth for the first vegetable forms of life. And here, be it noted, that the first forms of all things were born, that is, had their origin in water. The fourth day of creation, the vegetable tidal wave, now reaches the barren shores of our planet and produces the first rudimental forms of vegetable life, which develop into the most gross, gigantic shapes, rude and imperfect as the earth upon which they grow. But as time progresses, so does the vegetable kingdom, each age giving more perfect forms, and the evening and the morning were the fourth day. The fifth day of creation, the previous tide waves having run their course, the animal life wave now sets in, and from the lowest rudimental forms of life successively evolve the various orders of animal life, race after race appearing, running its course, and becoming extinct, giving place to more complete organisms, and the evening and the morning were the fifth day. The sixth day of creation, the preceding 5 tide waves of evolution have now prepared our earth for nature's grandest climax, the evolution of the human form. Man, for at this age, we read, and the Lord made man out of the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and he became a living soul. And the Lord created man in his own image, male and female created he them. During the 5 days of creation, the vegetable and animal have been evolved, and when man appears upon the scene, everything is in a vastly improved and highly developed condition, compared with the condition of the early monstrous forms. And the evening and the morning were the 6th day. And here we must digress. Some students of the occult imagine, for certainly they are not properly initiated and trained in the schools of occultism, that the missing link or first human form, the connection between the animal and human, was caused by a spiritual impulse union, which, acting upon the highest form of animal, an ape, for example, produced an entirely different species, quite human in their organism, but hairy, etc., and that from this missing link, the human race, as at present, has been evolved. But this is erroneous and void of truth. While the spirit atoms have been evolving upward from the mineral, the spiritual form has been evolving downward until it became tangible and objective, possessing at first a vast but loosely organized body. Each age saw it smaller and more compact, until at the end of the 3rd race of the first human round, the spiritual man had a compact, well-organized body. And the commencement of the 4th race, the center of the 7, was the first point of contact, the focus of the spirit downwards, and the apex of the material upwards. See note below. Matter and spirit met and formed the first real physical man of the human race. This is the great mystery, the lowest point in the arc of spiritual evolution, impinges upon the highest arc, or culminating point, of material evolution, and forms the origin of man. The evolution of the remaining root races having taken place, the life impulse begins to ebb and slowly quits our shores, and our earth for the first time enjoys a rest. The 6 days of creation are at an end, and the 7th is the day of rest. Note, this needs a little explanation. The first race of human beings who existed upon this planet were really spiritual. Their bodies were quite ethereal when compared with our gross organisms, but were sufficiently material to be objective and tangible. They were pure and innocent, true Adams and Eves. Their country was indeed a garden of paradise. They were natural-born adepts of the highest order. They played with the akasa and the magnetic currents of our globe as the boys in Bulwer Lytton's coming race played with the tremendous vril. The elementals and nature spirits were, by their art, rendered objective and performed the duties of servants to them. This was the true golden age. It was the first spiritual race of human beings, the progenitors of humanity upon our earth. The race which followed them was termed the Silver Age, in the arcane doctrine of the occult. Their descendants, although pure and able to control the psychic currents and gods in comparison to ourselves, were far inferior to their forefathers of the Golden Age. Both these races, and also the third, the people of the Copper Age, when they wished to die, passed peacefully away, and their bodies were immediately disintegrated by the currents of vril. There were neither shades, shells, nor phantoms in our atmosphere in those days. The Third or Copper Age, people were as inferior to those of the Silver Age as were the silver to the golden. Mankind was on the downward cycle. lies, deceit, and selfishness began to be engendered, and consequently there arose a school of black magic. In this age, the first elements of that curse, caste, arose. This, the Copper Age, was the last remnant of those who inherited the divine wisdom of the gods of the Golden Age. The spiritual races had now reached the lowest possible point in the arc of spiritual evolution. The fourth race, or Iron Age people, were the first of the gross physical races who became mighty hunters and ate flesh meat, and whose animal passions alone ruled their enjoyments. From this date, the nations became migratory nomads, and soon lost all traces of that high civilization which belonged to the early Copper Age races. This is, then, the esoteric explanation of the 4 ages of antiquity, and refers only to the first round of mankind upon any newly created planet, the 3 highest dates possible in any given round. The other cycles of years, termed golden, silver, etc., refer solely to polar motion and the changes of our Earth's climate. The day of rest, the Sabbath of the Lord. The earth slumbers and enjoys the peace of nirvana. After this Sabbath, the first day of a new week commences, for the gaseous tide wave, having gone the circuit of the planetary chain, once more reaches our globe. The atmosphere is again reorganized, purified, and galvanized with new life to make it fit to receive and sustain a higher phase of evolution. It breathes the breath of a new life upon our awakening planet. The life impulse that has been passive during the Sabbath of the Lord becomes again active. After the expiration of the gaseous wave and another polar day, the beds of the oceans have risen and become dry land, and the old continents are now at the bottom of the ocean. And as this takes place slowly, the leading types of flora, fauna, and surviving types of the 7 human families retreat from the sinking continents and occupy the new-made land and mountains, which are waiting to liberate their long-imprisoned spirit atoms. And this is effected directly the mineral wave arrives at the commencement of the second polar day. The old mineral elements are now liberated, and the incoming mineral wave becomes incarnated in their place. By the time this tide has attained its climax, the newly liberated spirit atoms of this planet form a new mineral wave, which, seeking reincarnation, begins to flow onto the next planet, which has already been prepared for it by the preceding gaseous wave. Then in succession comes the vegetable, animal, etc., to prepare a new heaven and a new earth for the incoming life wave that shall evolve the second round of humanity, which, having again evolved its 7 root races and their innumerable sub- and offshoot races, again passes on its journey round the chain, leaving only a remnant of its 7 leading types to survive the long ages of slumber, to give the struggling nomad that nature has left behind a chance of incarnating themselves to form the connecting links for the next round. And so does evolution proceed, until each planet of the chain has evolved 7 complete rounds of humanity, and then the great jubilee of the earth takes place. 7 times 7 rounds equal 49, and 7 races of human beings on 7 planets is also 49, and the 50th is the year of Jubilee, symbolized by the Jews every 50th year, when no work was done and the land rested. As it is below, so it is above. As on the earth, so in the sky. Remember this. And now, as a conclusion to this part of La Clef Hermetique, we give the cycles and periods in full, tabulated, so as to enable the student to comprehend them at a glance. It only remains to say that at the end of every great period of 16,064,000 years, the sun of our system passes into a passive state of sleep and remains so for 127,008,000 years. It is, in fact, the solar nirvana, just as the Earth enters nirvana at the end of every complete evolution. All the planetary chains of the solar system are disintegrated during the great solar nirvana and recreated upon the awakening of our sun from its cycle of rest. The alternate states of activity and rest are by the Hindu initiates termed the days and nights of Brahma. We will now end with the teaching of Genesis and pole shift, as not to overwhelm you, dear friends. We thank you for joining us again and hope that you were able to understand the natural process of pole shift and what it implies for our future world, if these teachings be true. Stay with us as we continue to reveal this book and break through the mysteries and secrets of the elite.